The royal retinue grew more and more concerned, and they were forced deeper into the bowels of the seemingly unfinished warship. Pipes hissed and cabling sparked as more humans than anyone had ever seen swarmed the interior in a frenzy of activity. Their only acknowledgement of our presence was that they needed to stop working to move out of the way of the medical equipment we were dragging with us. Medical equipment. I dreaded the day we faced this horror. We all knew it was coming. We all prepared for it. We desperately clung to the hospital gurney as we walked impatiently through the corridor towards a central chamber. The human Marines with red crosses on their helmets seemed to have a greater command presence than the admirals and generals standing in their way. We were brought into a massive room, and my mind almost stopped as I tried to understand what I was looking at. A large dome-like structure seemingly haphazardly bolted into the ship's hull, dominated by a central pillar surrounded by strange machines. A room separated with two levels, the ground floor dominated by medical equipment and personnel. It was only now I noticed the dotting of other races, elves, ents, dwarves, even an orc dotted among the crew, each wearing a Terran Federation uniform. An Evish elder of all things, wearing a doctor's lab coat, snapped his fingers, and just like that, the hustle and roar stopped. The medics holding the gurney were the only ones who didn't stop their work and charged through the crowd towards the central pillar machine. The Marines worked quickly, and before we could do anything about it, began work with their desperately ill patient. Crown Prince Rakkar, barely a child even by the standards of elves, was with haste and great care lifted from the hospital bed into one of the strange machines. It was a strange thing, appearing more like a mold cast that you would rest a precious toy into. They had to stuff pillows and cushions in with him in order for him to fit inside it. I would have laughed if the situation wasn't so severe. The medics and doctors rapidly swarmed the device and attached various cables, catheters, and other items to the child, and we all breathed a sigh of relief when the child produced a beep from the heart monitor. A screen above the bed showed a strange set of oscillating waveforms. The elder, accompanied by several doctors, shockingly enough, one of which was an orc, crowded around the child and paid very close attention to what was going on. The elder used a hand to cast a gentle spell, an appraisal or investigation magic from what I could tell. He concentrated, his eyes closed with a short utterance of an unknown spell. "He's still there, but barely. Move quickly. Op is a go, op is a go, code 2, code 2. One of the medics yelled through his radio. Just like that, the frantic hustle began with renewed vigor. We were shoved through doors to an upper-level observation room as the massive number of people rushed around in a frantic haste to accomplish their jobs. 24 doctors, nurses, and healing mages swarmed the central pillar. 5 Marines entered the room, all wearing some kind of strange bodysuit. They all moved over to the central pillar, entering their own pods in the machines. The room goes dark. The elder calls for silence, and the doctors quietly shuffle about in a state of constant alarm as they work. Any attempt at conversation, or attempt to understand what was going on, was met with one of the attendees shushing us. The people in the operation were communicating perfectly through only subtle nods, facial expressions, and military hand signals and magic signs. We could see the LCD screens above each person's pod, showing how the waves depicted were oscillating. Apparently, the technicians on duty understood all of these things, and each time a wave or frequency went the wrong way, a series of grunts and frantic typing and clicking followed. Doctors shuffled quietly on the floor, no footsteps, just shuffles, either in haste or slow and deliberate as they attended each patient, each one doing the usual thing of checking pulses and heart rates, blood pressure, and eye movement, each time being done constantly, continuously, each by a different physician. Even mages were among the crowd, casting the occasional healing spell. Clearly, this was a well-practiced, well-managed operation. Each and every man and woman involved, trained and grouped together in perfect harmony to accomplish their goal. I had never seen coordination like this outside of a military operation. Frankly, this level of cooperative, single-minded focus was just as terrifying as the circumstances surrounding it. Then, the prince began to move. For the first time in 2 months, he opened his eyes and breathed a deep sigh. Before we could do anything, attendants nearby silenced us and made us quiet down. The doctors quickly worked, nurses cradling the boy to wake him and calm him down. He was quickly removed from the machine, hastily moved into an adjacent room with a dozen doctors and nurses attending. One attendant approached, handing the Emperor himself a notepad with writing on it. The Emperor read it, removed his cloak and carried it with him, also removing his loud shoes and going barefoot. He looked at us and silently commanded us to stay. He was ushered through the room as quietly and quickly as possible and allowed to see his son. We were shushed and gestured to be quiet and wait. An hour passed. One of the Marines came out of the pod and shook his head in a daze. 3 doctors immediately swarmed and checked him. They only used a series of quiet grunts, head nods, and sign language or military hand gestures to communicate through the entire ordeal. The Marine was ushered out of the room down the corridor of his own accord and received an approving nod and pat on the shoulder from his commander. Minutes later, another Marine, followed by another, emerged from the machine and was frantically checked on by doctors. One appeared to be injured, with part of his uniform torn open and blood pouring from an open wound on his arm. The injured officer was hastily bandaged, then ushered into a recovery room with the other heading down the corridor to his barracks. Again, he received an approving nod and pat on the shoulder from his commander. 10 minutes passed and one more Marine appeared. He grunted and growled at the doctors who came to help him and gestured urgently to the last Marine still in his pod. They attended, and he, now sporting a bleeding leg, grabbed a set of bandages and patched himself up, shuffling calmly into the nearby recovery ward by himself as doctors and healers tended to the last guy. They all worked in a fevered manner and carefully tended to the soldier who was now twitching and moving in his sleep, his heart monitor clearly going crazy. 2 minutes later, he awoke with a gasp, then vomited a glob of blood as a sudden fury of yells, activity, and screams shattered the abnormal quiet of the room. The Marine was hastily placed onto a gurney, stripped of his uniform as they moved and shoved into an operating theater with a half-dozen mages casting every healing spell they knew. The control room suddenly buzzed with frantic activity as the sound of typing and code phrases, coding language, and other stuff filled the room. From dead silence to the roar of a stadium, the entire ship burst into a frenzy of activity. The rest of the retinue was allowed to wander away and do their own thing, seeing to the Emperor and his son. I walked up to the elder and opened my mouth to ask a question. He raised a hand, stopping me, and brought over the human doctor who seemed in charge of everything. "Can I help you?" he said. "Yes. Ahem! What the fuck is going on?" I yelled loudly, my voice echoing through the whole ship. He stood flabbergasted for a moment, then slapped me across the face. "This is a hospital, sir, a medical facility. I would kindly ask you to moderate your volume. As to your query, this is NOXCAPE, a machine for dreams." I rubbed my sore cheek and stood silent for a bit longer. "Would you please be so kind as to elaborate a bit more?" "So long as you remain cordial, yes, I would be happy to. Come here, let me show you." He showed me towards the control room. He said something to one of the control operators and they replied something before I could get close enough to hear details. He pointed towards the screen and pressed play on a video. It was from the perspective of a helmet-mounted camera. The imagery was bouncy and jerky, but it was watchable. It showed a strange, discordant landscape of blood-colored sand, gnarled trees, and forgotten, decrepit buildings. The camera moved and showed the other 4 Marines there in uniform. They listened in, wordlessly, and then barked orders at each other. They charged forward, weapons drawn at the sight of strange, monstrous creatures. They opened fire and reduced the monsters to atoms. They approached the horde, and there, still in his sleeping clothes, was the crown prince, screaming, terrified. They grabbed the boy carefully, and one shielded him as the entire area completely changed, shifting, warping, remaking itself into a castle on a hill. Blue grass all around them, the clouds pink and shaped like odd toys or strange candies. An army of monstrous beings, shaped like enormous rabbits with razor-sharp teeth and giant claws, stood at the ready and then charged the castle walls. They were no match for the Marines' weapons, and the battle was over fast. The area warped again and changed to a huge maze-like structure. The Marines all kept the child in close proximity, 2 front, 2 back, one protecting the kid in the center. The video shows various traps, monsters, and other things in their path as they work their way through the maze, becoming separated as they continued onward by various means. The camera flipped past various perspectives as the maze shifted and twisted, cutting the squad off. One Marine was hit by a spike trap and got his arm cut open. 2 Marines got cornered by a monster and grabbed one of them, slamming him into the wall and cutting open the other one's leg before being mercilessly gunned down. Another Marine was brought to the brink of exhaustion, running from a collapsing floor. The last shot of the video showed the Marine guarding the prince carrying the boy towards the center, barely dodging traps and beasts, shooting with his pistol and tossing the child into a portal at the center of the maze. The Marine stood to fend off the hordes as he waited for his comrades. His camera perspective caught a red flare that went up, indicating he needed to go, and he jumped into the portal. The camera showed each Marine arriving at the portal in the sequence they woke up, the last one to leave seriously injured, carried by his comrade. The video ended. I just looked at the doctor in complete shock. That was the dreamscape. That was the, oh gods, the place where demons of the shroud and ether take their victims to steal their souls. You found a way in. Yep, we did indeed, he replied with a smile. Where ether or psionic demons put a victim into a comatose state, torture them with nightmares and horrors to break their resolve, then slowly fight each other over who gets to keep the victim's soul. The operator nearby said with a smile, Well, what could I possibly say to this? Well, first real successful field test, I suppose. This is NOXCAPE, a machine for dreams, named after the ancient video game Slamscape, a video game about dreams and amnesia, a machine for pigs. It's the first ever functioning unit of a psionic interface engine. It allows us to safely enter the dreamscape and retaliate, he said with a wry smile. If it is only a dream or conduit, how did those soldiers get injured? I asked in concern. The mind makes it real. The magic coursing through us all makes us feel the pain. You hurt the soul, you hurt the mind. You hurt the mind, you hurt the body. It may not be real here, but there it's as real as it gets. It's how they hurt us, he responded, showing me a few snippets of the action that took place. Which means, dear ambassador, just like any man worth the iron in his blood would do, those 5 men volunteered to face a potential horrific death to bring back your prince. You may thank them in person when they are back on their feet. The operator said to me with a smile, then resumed her work. I went silent for several hours afterwards and met the Crown Prince later that day to find the boy was more than just okay. He was more lively than we'd seen him in his entire life. Humans had created a piece of technology that could directly attack the dreamscape. For the first time in tens of thousands of years, we had a way to get back at the creatures that had plagued us since we awoke to the psionic maelstrom and magic ether. Finally, we had a way to fight back.